Hello and welcome once again to the College Football Breakdown, College Football Focus. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. Talking about some great options for you for Saturday's slate. And we're going to start things off, of course, at quarterback, one of the most important positions. And we've got some big names, well, maybe not big names, but big performers up top and some big totals. Starting off with a guy that some people may not have as their number one quarterback, but it makes sense. He's been putting up insanely good numbers over the last few weeks. Matt Johnson from Bowling Green, 8,600 on FanDuel, 94 on DraftKings. And you mentioned on here you expect some people to have Seth Russell, Trayvon Boykin, or Patrick Mahomes as their number one. But Matt Johnson's just putting up gaudy numbers still.
Yeah, and you have to consider that he's 8,600 on FanDuel, and Boykin is 10.3. So quite a disparity there. I think you can build a lot around them. And they really should have similar projections going into this week. So there's a 75 over-under in that Purdue Bowling Green game. And if you remember last week, we had Brendan Motley, the Virginia Tech quarterback, making his first career start against this Purdue team. And he put up some pretty good numbers. So I just really don't think this is a defense that can slow Johnson down, who's been just on fire the past 2 weeks. Even lit up a Memphis defense last week. That's pretty good for all intents and purposes. But yeah, so you can go with Russell, Boykin, Mahomes, or Johnson. But I mean, I'm just playing the price here, and Johnson easily the best one, best combination of price and upside on FanDuel. DraftKings, it's a little more of a conversation as he's 9,400. I think we can kind of look towards Mahomes there. And that kind of segues into our number two play because that's what he is on this article. 8,700 on FanDuel, 8,900 on DraftKings is Mahomes. And Texas Tech loves to throw the ball. This Texas Tech TCU game has an 80 over/under. TCU favored by about a touchdown. So it's just going to be a back and forth shootout. All the guys that I've been seeing, trying to handicap this game as well are recommending the over. So that's no fluke. There really isn't much of a chance for disappointment for it, going 49-45 or something crazy like that. So roll out all your guys from this matchup with confidence. That includes Mahomes. As I said in this article, he can throw 4 or 5 touchdowns and even run a couple because head coach Cliff Kingsbury is actually running him towards the goal line, and it's working with those draw plays. Just spread everyone out and run him right up the middle or bootleg him around the side. So, that upside of getting a couple rushing touchdown, it really helps. So, if you can't fit Johnson in on DraftKings because Mahomes is a little bit cheaper, I'll look that way. Otherwise, if you're making multiple lineups, you can pivot straight off of Johnson to Mahomes, and I think that's a pretty good call.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's spread offense, a volume passing attack, going to leave open a lot of opportunities for him to just run right up the middle and grab those last couple yards there. So definitely a dual threat type now. And then the cheap guy who's been cheap for a couple weeks, he's in this article every week because, like you mentioned here, his price just doesn't rise despite being very productive so far. Thomas Sirk from Duke, $6,800 on both sites ends. Ended up with a 17-point performance against Northwestern last week, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a very good defense, one of the better ones that in the country, really. I mean, they had a great game against Stanford. Didn't even score a touchdown, and Stanford went and put up, 41 on USC, something like that. Yep. So, I mean, he did well in that matchup, and at this price tag, you certainly have to consider him.
Yeah, and I think Sirk could have got more on that game. Definitely left some fantasy points on the board as Duke got into the red zone a couple times but couldn't convert. So, the matchup against Georgia Tech, it's okay. I mean, I would classify it as mediocre, nothing to really be concerned about, but not great also, if you look at it that way. So I think Sirk, just purely a price play. Anytime you get a running quarterback who can, run for 50, 60 yards, score a touchdown, maybe 2, and he's cheap, that's someone to consider and, maybe stack around. And hope the guys up top, the Boykins and Mahomes and Johnson, just don't go absolutely nuts, and Sirk can at least come close to their fantasy total, maybe for a tournament or something. But purely a price play here, and I think he's probably one of the better ones of this category. And I should say, on DraftKings, where you have to roster 2 quarterbacks, it might make sense to have him as your second quarterback here. as you know, the salary cap there is pretty tough, and you might not be able to grab two of the top tiers. So he's a very comfortable QB2 on DraftKings.
Yeah, so pick your favorite of those top two guys, pair them up with Cirque. Kind of makes a lot of sense here. And then if you don't know about this first running back, you either are new to college football or you didn't watch it last week, or you just, I don't know, maybe you hate LSU. But Leonard Fournette looked absolutely ridiculous last week. He was he's just absolutely unstoppable. And the game wasn't even close, but he still was getting carries into the third quarter. And his price, like you mentioned here, went up $300 on FanDuel, but $8,700 still just not nearly high enough for a high volume guy that, I mean, he's nearly impossible to take down right now. And I mean, he's been doing against SEC defenses. So this is the top guy that you want this week, and it's really hard to argue that.
Yeah, I think he'll be extremely popular, but that's for good reason. I think you'll have to have him in there in cash games, or you're going to be behind the eight ball, especially on FanDuel, because it's a little softer cap over there, and he is only 8,700. But if you watched any college football last week, this guy, they would cut into the game break, and this guy was flashing across your screen. I mean, just ripping off 70-yard runs, and they're showing him. At one point in time, I think he flung an Auburn defender over his shoulder right before he got into the end zone. It was just crazy. It was like nothing I've seen before.
Not even necessary, because he was going to score anyway.
Yeah, it looked like NFL blitz, with the dramatic tackles and guys flying in the huge stiff arm. That's what it reminded me of. It was something crazy, but he shouldn't have a problem at all against this Syracuse defense. I mean, not much resistance there. And as I said in the article, LSU's favored by 25 points. Sometimes you'd look at that as a blowout and maybe pivot elsewhere. But, I mean, if they're up by 25, it's because of Fournette. I mean, he's the heart and soul of this team. And as I've been saying for the past couple weeks, he's, on a Heisman campaign right now. I think he's actually the front runner, according to most sports books. So they're going to make sure he gets his numbers before he's taken out of the game to kind of help that Heisman run.
Yeah, and I've even seen some people speculating that maybe people start loading up the box, but good luck with that. I don't think that's going to make a whole
He'll
lot
just
of
run
difference.
outside then.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a great offensive line, and I don't think you have to be worried about Syracuse doing that really in this spot.
They could do that all they want. Doesn't mean it's going to work. So next up, another TCU player in this huge total, Aaron Green, 8,400 on FanDuel, 7,900 on DraftKings. And you mentioned he's in an awesome spot this week. Ridiculously high total. This is a game, like you mentioned, not only has a huge total, but we got experts, pundits, everyone expecting it to go even higher than that. Highest projected scoring team of the week. It makes sense to target as many guys as you can, elite playmakers in this game, and Aaron Green definitely fits that bill.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just plenty of scoring, plenty of production to go around in this game. I think you could have Boykins and Green on the same team if you really want. But I really like his price tag on DraftKings and FanDuel. That is, I mean, obviously you're going to want to get Fournette on FanDuel for $300 more, but $9,700 from Fournette to $7,900 for Green on DraftKings is quite the discrepancy there, especially considering DraftKings has a tighter salary cap all around. So Aaron Green, excellent candidate for 2 touchdowns again this week. I mean, TCU is just going to be moving it into the red zone at will pretty much. And, Texas Tech could come back, strike fast. There's just going to be a ton of possessions, ton of scoring possessions, and I'm willing to bet that Green gets in on at least a couple of those with touchdowns. So 100-plus yards, 2 touchdowns, seems like a pretty reasonable floor here. And, considering the price and everything, I think is a very safe play.
Yeah, if you like offense or hate defense, or you're going to stack this game, it's going to be a really fun one to watch too. So, yep. Next guy, been a value play for the last couple weeks. Had a huge game last week. Patrick Skov. He's $5,800 on FanDuel, $6,300 on DraftKings, and last week in a tough matchup had 3 touchdowns. 2 of them receiving. Those were kind of garbage time touchdowns, I guess. Once they were not garbage time. Once they got down big, he was involved in the passing game, which was a little bit of a surprise, as much as he was, but definitely paid off with a big second half in that game. And like you mentioned here, there's not a lot of other options around this price, so he's going to be a really popular play.
Yeah, I think it's a very easy pick on FanDuel at $5,800 because no one else is down there. DraftKings a little bit different. I think you have some decent mid-range options, particularly London of Michigan State, with them checking in as big favorites there. I think he could get 100-plus yards and a touchdown. But, on FanDuel, Skov is the guy. playing Duke, who, I mean, Duke's defense kind of surprised me last week. I had a little bit of Justin Jackson from Northwestern. He didn't do too much, but, they're historically bad against this triple option attack. So I'm willing to bet that Georgia Tech can get it done against them, at least offensively. And, I think this might be a sneaky, I don't want to say high scoring because we just got done talking about the Texas Tech TCU. So the standard of high scoring has been set like 80 plus. But, I mean, the over under here is about 48. I think it can go over that with these two teams. So I really like Scav. And I think that's an easy pick on FanDuel for 5,800 as an RB2 play.
Yeah, I really like that as well. And then, speaking of high scoring, high octane offenses, Corey Coleman from Baylor. I'm sure you know the name by now if you follow college football. 8,200 on FanDuel, 85 on DraftKings. And you mentioned here Corey Coleman, Josh Doxson, top two receivers early slate. Doxson, of course, a TCU receiver in that huge game. And Coleman on FanDuel, you mentioned, is a better value. Doxson cheaper on DraftKings, so makes sense to maybe split your action across the two sites. And I mean, Coleman is a hell of a big play threat. We've seen this guy. I mean, he's a threat to take to the house at any time, and that price tag isn't even really that prohibitive at 8,200.
Yeah, ordinarily when you have a guy like Coleman playing, I mean, Baylor's favored by at least 4 touchdowns in this game against Rice, and then you have Doxson playing in that high total game against Texas Tech, which should be back and forth and competitive within a touchdown. Ordinarily, I mean, if you just had player A, player B, I'd go with Doxson just because the more competitive game. But I don't think that really pertains to Corey Coleman because this is a guy, we saw it last week. Baylor ran away with it against, I don't even remember who they're playing, some garbage opponent. They won like 66-14. And Coleman had 4 touchdowns like in the first half. It was just insane. We saw him do it against SMU. Sometimes they hand it off to him. They just like to get him the ball and watch him run, and I don't really blame them because it's pretty awesome. But yeah, he could really rack up the yards in the first half, come near 200 yards receiving, and maybe get a couple touchdowns. I don't see anyone from Rice catching him if he gets the ball in space. So, it's purely a price play between him and Doxson at this point. So, just the way I outlined it, Doxson's cheaper on DraftKings, Coleman's cheaper on FanDuel. That's a way to hedge them.
Yeah, and like you said, in a game where they're favored by a lot, maybe some people will be scared off a wide receiver in that game, but that just might help lower his ownership for you in GPPs. Next guy, not quite a household name, but a guy that's been putting up insane numbers recently, Roger Lewis from Bowling Green. Obviously, a nice pairing with Matt Johnson there, but 7,600 on FanDuel, 77 on DraftKings. And last 2 weeks, you mentioned here, 22 catches, 461 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Yes, that's 400, not 200, not 100. 75 points here, close game. Bowling Green only favored by a field goal here. So this is, like you mentioned earlier, a great game to target with offense. And why not target the top wide receiver for this Bowling Green attack?
Yeah, Matt Johnson to Roger Lewis all day. I mean, it's going to be very popular because it was, it's paid off the past 2 weeks. But I think that's one that you're going to need in a lot of cash games. And, maybe in tournaments, just kind of take the chalk there. Actually, I don't even know if it's chalk because Boykin, Doxson's up there. I mean, you have Mahomes and his wide receivers. So I don't know. There's enough competition for them as the QB wide receiver pairing that maybe they just won't have the high ownership percentage that they deserve. But, certainly looking at the game logs and everything and the opponent in Purdue, high-scoring matchup here, it looks like Matt Johnson to Roger Lewis is the way you'll want to go in that pairing and then kind of diversify elsewhere and be contrarian elsewhere for tournaments. I think that's a pretty good strategy that I'm going to deploy in at least a couple spots when, trying to take down the Hail Mary there in this early-only slate. So, Roger Lewis, 7,600, not quite in the price range of those top guys, just a little bit down there, but could easily be the number one fantasy wide receiver of this slate.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time we had the Bowling Green game on FanDuel, right? Because they were on
DraftKings last week. I think week one they were on FanDuel, and I actually had Roger Lewis, and my team went off except for him. He didn't do very good against Tennessee. And then sure enough, the next 2 weeks, he's putting up like 260 yards and just going crazy. But, I had plenty of exposure these past 2 weeks too, so I can't be too mad at him.
So he's already given you as much as you deserve, and now the rest is just extra.
I guess so. I called him up after that week 1. I'm like, come on, man, you're killing me. And then,
And he's like, my bad. Let me just get 460 yards real quick the next 2 weeks.
Yep, so, and then I called him again, and I'm like, yeah, I want more. So there you go.
Make sure you make that call between now and Saturday before I get into my rosters too.
Yeah, you had 261 yards last game. We're gonna need more than that.
Yeah, we're gonna need 262 this week. So see what you can do about that. Fall forward on your last play. Now, next up is a value play. Dennis Parks from Rice, 4,500 on FanDuel, 48 on DraftKings. You mentioned how he's going to be locked into not an expensive game, a high total game, and PPR setup especially on DraftKings. You mentioned how he has only 8 catches in the last 2 games, but 240 total yards and 2 touchdowns for a guy that is minimum price on FanDuel and not too far above it on DraftKings. Makes sense to target a guy like this, especially with a team that's going to be behind for, well, pretty much the entire game.
Yeah, I actually wrote that wrong. Just looking at it here, it makes it seem like he has 8 receptions in the past 2 games. He has 8 receptions in each of the past 2 games.
Okay.
So he has 16 receptions overall, which is great PPR stats. And Rice is going to fall down in this game. Kind of like, if you watch that SMU Baylor game, that was week 1. SMU fell down, and Baylor kind of backed off a little bit after they got up, 21 points or so, and that left a lot of their receivers open on the perimeter. So I'm kind of hoping Parks figures into that mix, same game flow like that, and they can kind of dump him short passes, see what he does with it. And just really rack up yards and receptions that way. And for minimum salary on FanDuel, a guy with a track record like this in a high-scoring game, Rice is going to have a ton of possessions. I think it makes sense to go with him, and he's probably the best cheap play that I see down there. 4,800 on DraftKings, kind of like I said, yeah, it's a little higher considering that the absolute minimum there is 3,000. But, full PPR site, I think that sets up pretty well for him.
Yeah, and he seems like a nice filler if you're stacking some other teams and you need someone cheap. Like you said, he's got a nice floor and a nice ceiling. So if you need a minimum salary guy to fill into whatever stacks or teams you put together, then he makes a lot of sense. And speaking of a guy that makes a lot of sense, this is a guy that was locked into just about all of my lineups last week. There's not a whole lot of tight ends that have any sort of production across the country. And while you have to pay expensive price compared to other tight ends, $3,700 is below the receiver minimum for a guy that ended up with over 100 yards last week. Tyler Higbee, he's been a great target for the last few weeks. Nice high floor. He's got a big ceiling too. Western Kentucky, a team that just puts up a ton of points all the time. So Tyler Higbee, a guy that, once again, he's probably going to be in a majority of my lineups.
If Tyler Higbee was 4,700, I'd probably find a way to get him in. He's just that much better than all the other tight ends in this slate. And that's really probably the way this guy's been producing. That's probably an accurate price point, would be like a 47, 5,000. There's actually more expensive tight ends. I saw Austin Hooper in the Friday slate from Stanford is at 4,000. And
no respect.
He's good, but he hasn't been producing at the same clip as Higbee. So 3,700 here. I think that's a steal, easy pick. You can just click him in, cash games, tournaments alike, and let him do his thing. He's one of the, I don't want to say number 1 wide receiver because Tywan Taylor, another wide receiver to write down there, is really making a case for that. But he's right up there in receptions for Western Kentucky, probably one of the best passing offense in the country. So that's just an easy pick there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one other guy, if you want to pivot off of the popular play, I think Higbee was something like 45 to 50% owned in the big GPPs last week. But
it's still way too low.
Yeah, he
seriously, like, if you can get a leg up on half the field just by that one pick, I'll take that all day.
Yeah, I think he scored 22, 23 points, something like that. So you don't worry about ownership percentage with a guy like that. That's just a guy you go ahead and lock in and move on. But we do have another high volume option this week. Ben McCord from CMU. 10 for 147 and a touchdown last week. Obviously a much tougher matchup this week, but that just may well mean that he's going to be behind, and we'll see this offense throwing the ball even more. And, as far as passing attacks, this is still a top 20 passing attack in the country so far this season, and especially because you anticipate they'll be behind. We saw Air Force get some garbage time touchdowns on the ground even last week, so got to imagine that he'll be able to get some plenty of production in this one.
Yeah, he's coming off a 10-catch, 147-yard in a touchdown stat line at Syracuse last week. So you have to kind of like that. They look his way in crunch time. And, I'm guessing that the Michigan State corners are going to, pay more attention to Corey Davis out of their star wide receiver and kind of leave McCord alone. So he may be able to gobble up a few more receptions. He really doesn't have the reliability and the track record of Higbee. So that's where the difference comes in, and McCord's obviously going to have a much lower ownership percentage. So I'm going to recommend this one as a tournament only play, just hoping that he can, maybe replicate Higbee's production, get around that 100-yard mark and get a touchdown as well. Save you that $700 you can invest elsewhere. Maybe do another stud that someone with a Higbee lineup can't get. So that's basically the rationale when spinning down to McCord just for a kind of a tournament single bullet play.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense there to swerve a little bit off the chalk, but I'm certainly not getting creative with my tight ends outside of these two, really. Yeah. So that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Check out all the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com. There's some cheat sheets that you made up for college football. Lots of content for NFL and the rest of Major League Baseball up until the end, too. So go ahead and check that out, and we'll see you next time.